Welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and today we have a very special episode, one that has been requested by our listeners for years. We're finally here with sports betting best practices with some general guidelines. We're also going to delve into dozens of topics, and luckily, I am joined by two experts in this field. Today, we have Billy Ward, a member of Sean Kerner's predictive analytics team here with us, as well as Evan Abrams, Action Network's director of research and media. How you guys doing? Evan, let me start with you. Are you champing at the bit to get into football season?
Can't wait. I mean, we're just coming off the Olympics, so it's like a little bit of a high to a low, but we're just getting ready. I just love action in general, and we're getting to the best action.
Is this the calm before the storm, Billy, or are you already working on all kinds of predictive, goodies with Sean and the team to get everyone ready for football season?
Yeah, we're always working on stuff behind the scene. I've had a great time with baseball season this year with my Nerfies. It was literally just last week I said out loud to someone, I was like, all right, I'm ready for football. The baseball grind, it's every day. You can't build up throughout the week to look forward to something. So I am finally ready, I think.
Before we dive in, I want to set the table a bit. All three of us gamble with great frequency. We love doing it. We take it seriously. But this, audio journey that we're going to take you on in the next 40 minutes, it's for serious gamblers. It's also for casual gamblers who just want to get a little bit sharper, have some better, tendencies and habits into football season so you can head into the fall sharper, smarter, more confident. And a big part of this, too, is the way that things are presented in the media. It's all about hitting that 10-leg parlay or hitting it rich on a single bet. And I like to draw an analogy from the links. When it comes to golf, anybody can walk up to Top Golf or the driving range or the first tee and bomb at 285 yards. But think of us as your caddies. We're going to help you with course management, when to get aggressive, when to lay up and be conservative, what happens if you hit it out of bounds, all the rules that a good caddy know. And it can help you become a more consistent golfer. In the same way, we want to do that here with sports betting, so you have a better understanding of when you're at an advantage, a disadvantage, and how to stay away from those bad mistakes that can end up costing you and destroying your bankroll. Now, before we get into it, Billy, I'd like to ask you, how long have you bet on sports, and how long did it take you to really feel comfortable out on the course, so to speak?
Yeah, I've been casually betting here and there probably at this point close to 20 years. I remember betting on the Pistons to win the finals in middle school in 2004. So that would be 20 years. But I really got into it after DFS became a thing and then kind of transitioned from there to sports betting, as I think many of us did. And that's when I really started to feel comfortable, is learning those lessons in player projection and how to do things like that, and then taking that over to sports gambling. So probably the last 4 or 5 years, I'd say I felt comfortable with it.
Now, obviously, Evan, you didn't start at a director level in terms of understanding of the sports betting landscape. How long did it take for you to get comfortable, and when did you officially start?
Yeah, I guess it's been about 20 years, but it probably took me about 5 years or so after I started to even start to understand edges. And I'll use your golf analogy for a second, like which club to choose in certain circumstances. So, yeah, but listen, even today I'm learning. And I think everybody learns along the way. And if you stop learning, that's when you start to lose the edges, in my opinion. So keep reading, keep learning.
As someone who's bet for 25 years, I really look at it as two different halves of my betting career. The first half is when I was just kind of fumbling around in the dark, trying to have fun, trying to, get some winners on the board. And then I started booking bets in college. And as soon as I shifted to the other side of the transaction, it became very clear to me what was a sharp gambler and what was a square. And I wanted to get away from those tendencies and those tactics that kept the squares in the red at all times. So coming out of that, I started to learn of those pitfalls that I wanted to avoid. Now, we're going to throw around a lot of jargon and hopefully unpack some of it and demystify it to a certain degree. So let's start very simply with plus EV, expected value, value in general. What do those phrases mean to you, Billy, and how do you use them on a daily basis as a gambler?
Yeah, the expected value of a bet is just what you would expect to return or get back if you made that bet a theoretical infinite number of times, right? So if it's a 10% plus EV and you made that bet enough times, we would expect to make 10% of whatever our stake was. And that's just based on the difference between what the market or what the line is and what you think the true probability of that happening is. And I kind of throw those out interchangeably: EV, value, edge, all of those things. Obviously, if it's negative expected value, there is no edge. It's the opposite of an edge. You're, in theory, over a long enough time frame, losing money. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is we'll say things like that, but obviously we don't know the exact outcome. For my nerfy, models and projections, I can say my model thinks it's going to happen 47% of the time or something, but that's not an exact science. So that's just based on whatever underlying data you're using, whether that's Sean's player props or anything else we give out. It's not an exact science, but we like to think over a long enough time frame and the way we backtest things that we'll eventually get to that expected value.
Evan, let's talk about the three pack teasers, parlays, and the Russian nesting doll of parlays, the round robin. Could you just kind of walk through and explain that? Because in a lot of ways, teasers are kind of that entryway for gamblers the very first time that they're learning of something other than a straight bet. So let's start with teasers. How do they work?
So you'll start off the bat by really understanding the basics, which is teasers work for most people because of key numbers, which is, in football, even with the 2-point conversion, like 3, 7, 10, the numbers that the game tends to fall on the most. So teasing through and around those key numbers, a lot of bettors will say don't tease through 0 because you kind of lose value at the half and minus a half. Just not something that most people do, especially because you're paying a larger VIG in certain circumstances. And honestly, watching the odds itself on the teaser. But going back to the basics, teaser is just a parlay with adjusted prices and lines. So in football, you tend to see like 6, 6.5, 7-point teasers. In basketball, 4, 4.5, and 5-point teasers. Now in post legalization, though, you can pretty much move the lines any way you want on any game, and the book will spit out a price on either the game or the teaser itself. So I think kind of the traditional teaser has gone by the wayside a little bit with these gamified sports books. But the easiest way to understand kind of the plus EV is just making sure your odds are right, because a minus 110 priced teaser and a minus 120 or minus 130 can be a difference of like 1.5% to 3% difference in your bet and what you're returning. So those are all the basics, and those are the things, in my opinion, you should be paying attention to.
Now, when it relates to round robins, I think that's when we start to get the casual gambler a little bit nervous. I don't understand it. I'm just never going to use it. And in a lot of cases, particularly when you're playing underdogs, it can be advantageous as opposed to putting together a 4 and 5 leg parlay that's just destined for heartbreak with a single loss. You get to 4 or 5 wins, in a round robin, all of a sudden you are absolutely flush in terms of your bankroll. So walk us through why round robins are so popular with sharp bettors.
Well, let's just start off with the basics. If you don't know what a round robin is and you know what a parlay is, congratulations, you know what a round robin is, because it's just a parlay. All it is, and here's an easiest example. So 3 football games. You've got the Giants +3, you've got the Jets +7, and you've got the Cowboys +7. Now, all 3 of those teams together, 3 teams, would be a parlay if you have to hit all 3 of them. Now, a round robin of those 3 teams would just be 2-team parlays. So the Jets and Giants, or the Jets and Cowboys. Now, the only thing to understand when you're doing a round robin, and I'm doing the basics here with 3 teams, is that you're paying more of a price, just like you would be to put in multiple parlays. So if I'm doing a 2 round robin or a 3 in this case, which would be a parlay, I'm just paying for each of those bets. Now, what Mike said is 100% true, and it's usually the strategy of professional bettors when they're kind of messing around a little bit, because I personally don't think round robins in general are very much plus EV because you are just betting parlays. But if you put all the underdogs together, so in that example of the Giants +3, the Jets +7, and Dallas +7, if I were to add all of their money lines, which would be plus money, 200s, +150, etc., and only 2 of those hit, if I did the strategy we talked about before, you would come out with a profit. And if I did the parlay, obviously I would lose. So that tends to be the strategy behind some of this stuff. But again, if you're trying to figure out, is this good value or am I coming out on top? Just think of it as individual parlays. And the more teams you add, the more expensive it gets. So 4 teams, 5 teams, you're doing parlays under that big parlay amount. So if there's 5 teams in it, you do 4 or 3. But that's the basic gist of it. And you can kind of get the sense of how much something costs on any of the sports books when you click the tab.
And to zoom out even further, before you put your money into play, you need to think about bankroll management. This was a big differentiator for me at the beginning of my betting career to where I am now. And it starts with two specific numbers. How much money do you have in a pool to work with, and where do you want to get to? Because this can allow you to, fluctuate your risk appetite on a particular bet. It also helps you put a comfortable amount of money into play on a single bet. In a lot of cases, unit size, so your standard bet, should fall somewhere between 1 in a conservative situation to 5%, which would be an aggressive situation on a per bet basis. And being able to set things up like this, it allows you to be disciplined and to combat cold streaks. Everyone wants to brag about their hot streaks. I've gone 17-3 in the last 3 weeks. It cuts the other way. Even for really sharp bettors, you're going to have bad breaks. You're going to have cold streaks. So how do you protect yourself so you're not double, tripling down, and worse, trying to chase those losses? That's how you destroy a bankroll. And when you think about it through an entire season, this is how you protect yourself. Speaking of protecting yourself, sometimes sports books are offering things that you should take advantage of. There's quote unquote suckers bets with these 9 and 10 leg parlays. They want you to dump your money into those because you're not going to hit them. But on the other side, there's opportunities to strategize with bonus bets and sign up bonuses. Billy, how do you incorporate this into your overall strategy?
Yeah, it kind of loops back to your bankroll management spiel just a second ago, because for me, it really depends on whether that bonus bet is a somewhat significant part of my bankroll, whether it's close to a unit or whether it's just like, $5 and I've got a big bankroll and I don't really care about it. Either way, we should be looking for plus money bets, because with those bonus bets, you don't get your stake back. So a $10 bonus bet on an even money pick, if you win, you only get $10, where if you're betting $10 cash, you'd get 20. If you do the math on those on the return is closer to what it should be, the higher the odds go. Obviously, you're less likely to hit it. If you have just one of those small ones that doesn't really impact your bankroll, you don't really care if you don't get anything out of it. I just try to find the highest, plus money I can on that site. And then I use our odds screener to make sure that that's the best line at that site, because getting plus 500 on one sports book is great with your bonus bet. But if it was plus 700 somewhere else, you're leaving money on the table. It gets a little bit different if it's a significant amount, like when you make your first deposit, if they match that, stuff like that. With those, I start the same way. I'm trying to find a plus money bet that's the highest where I have the bonus bet. Then what I'll do, though, is I'll go to a different site, ideally the one that has the best odds on the other team or the other outcome, and just hedge that off. And you can play with the amounts depending on the numbers involved. But you can usually, if you work it right, get about 60% of that bonus value back, guaranteed no matter what happens, by betting on both sides of it. So that's something I would do if it's a significant chunk of my bankroll, whereas if it's just an insignificant amount, I'll just let it ride. You get a 10-1 every once in a while. The other thing I really like it for, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, is futures bets, just because you're usually looking at big plus money when you're trying to pick a team to win the Super Bowl or a player to win the MVP, stuff like that. We're usually hunting plus money anyway, so those bonus bets work out nicely on those.
One question we get often in the comments section, casual gamblers just want to know, like, why do bigger games generally have tighter lines? They go around and they shop. Shopping around is key, by the way. If you're in a state like mine in Pennsylvania, where there's 10 to 12 legal sports books, you can find better odds and plus money. And over time, if you use that as a best practice, you're just going to make more money. You're not going to leave those opportunities on the table. So as it relates to bigger games having tighter lines, I'd also like to expand this to a question of markets that have, larger volume, how that impacts, the bets and the odds that you see, as well as the phrase like higher liquidity. What does that mean, Billy, as it relates to games that have tighter or looser lines?
Yeah, the gist of it is just that when there's more people and more money betting onto a market, if there's something off with that line where there's truly an edge, enough people will have bet it to kind of found that out and push the sports books into making the quote unquote correct line. Again, like I was saying earlier, we don't know what the exact correct line should be. These are real humans, not a computer simulation. So we can't say exactly. But things like NFL games, NFL sides, soccer, European soccer, NBA, those things get so much attention in the market that if they're off by a point or two, that's going to get figured out pretty quick, because big bettors are going to come in, they're going to bet 5-6 figures, and the sports books don't want that risk. Now, if you're looking at something like WNBA player props or Nerfies or some of these smaller markets that we like to bet, there's not so many total bets that if one or two people place a significant bet on one side, it's going to move the line at that book considerably. Some other books might follow suit, some might not, but that's why we get that wide spread. That's really important, especially if you're tailing other people's picks, because when Sean Kerner gives out a WNBA player prop and 20, 30, 50, 100 people bet it, that might be the whole market for that prop. So all of a sudden the sportsbook goes, oh no, we're on the wrong side of this one. We need to get that fixed and change the line. And then obviously if people are giving out an NFL side, unless the whole world tails them, it's not going to move the market very much. And then to the liquidity question, that also means that sportsbooks are willing to take bigger bets on markets where they already have more money and they feel more confident in the line. So if you're a super high roller and have a ton of money to bet, you can get down way more on an NFL point spread than you can on a WNBA player prop. I think for most people, that's probably not super relevant. With that bankroll management we're talking about, you're probably not running into that anyway, at least early in your career, but it's something to keep in mind if you do get to the point where you're a professional gambler or making a ton of money at this, where you can make more money if you can figure out how to beat NFL sides than you can WNBA player props, but it's much, much harder to do so. So it's a risk reward thing there.
Even in the sport that I cover the closest, which is college football, you see a huge disparity between an Oregon-Ohio State game that is going to be so well calibrated in terms of the numbers that they hang, how they adjust to action throughout the week, as opposed to this week 0 game between Hawaii and Delaware State. That game from open has moved 11 points in a point spread because Delaware State, certainly to casual bettors, that's a mystery box. They just see an FCS team. They assume that all FCS teams are bad. Let me be the first one to break this news. That is not true. North Dakota State and Delaware State may play at the same level, but they are nowhere close in terms of overall power ranking. So for a line to move 11 points, you don't need to be the sharpest bettor in the world to understand in football. That's a lot of line movement to understand getting a good number as opposed to, essentially playing a bad number. Now, let me bring you back into the conversation, Evan, because we're talking a lot about these bets that you're making, maybe a few days out, maybe 36 hours, maybe adjusting in game to be able to hedge. How do you look at futures, which could tie up your money for months at a time? How do you balance basically giving an interest-free loan to the sports books as opposed to what you can get back on the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I think off the bat, there's an understanding of kind of what it is, and then there's how to bet on it. And to me, it's a smaller bankroll overall, obviously, than like single games. I'm more interested in single games than I am futures bets for a number of reasons. One being the hold percentage is usually ridiculously higher in futures bets because, higher payouts, more markets, more options can be a difference of like 15 or 20%. So, and also you're usually able to get more money down on single games than you are futures. But even with legalization, I think a lot has changed again in this type of bet with the futures. To me, it's just more options, more different things. And what a future is again, it's not a single game. To me, it's something that comes out in fruition a few days down the line, weeks, months. It can be a title, can be a player accomplish a feat. I think futures, the title has kind of gotten a little cloudy with all these different options, but that's what the definition is to me. And then in terms of the interest part, which I think is a more difficult thing to grasp and part of the conversation, it's like right now in August, if I'm going to be investing in, the Celtics to win the title in the NBA next year, that's a long time to put my money into a sports book for a plus 250, plus 350 wager where the money just sits there. I'm not, accruing interest or anything like that on my side. My money's not doing anything for me except for the bet. So trying to figure that out, especially when it's large amounts of money, I think is a, difficult thing to grasp down the line more than just something fun. If I was to put, $5, $20 on like 100 to 1 shot. But again, shopping, like with everything, is probably the biggest asset here, which is, in a state like New York, if you've got 7, 8 different sports books, making sure you get the best percentage on your side is pretty vital, especially because the whole percentage on some of these markets, futures can be very, very high. Now, that's the percentage of money that the house keeps for every dollar wagered, which is the easiest way to explain it. Again, a lot of math and implied probability comes into play here, but that's the basics to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that one. Sorry, go ahead, Billy.
I know, I was say if I could jump in on that real quick. That's another reason I prefer to use bonus bets and stuff like that on futures, because if they're holding your money for X amount of time, your bonus bet isn't your money. You couldn't take your bonus bet to a high yield savings account and put it in there and demand extra money back. So obviously for most of us, it's not a huge chunk. We're not getting giant bonus bets. But over the course of the season, if there's a home run promotion that's giving you one every week, and you can build a portfolio of Cy Young candidates, MVPs, NFL Super Bowl winners, whatever, it can be pretty significant by the end of the year, and you're then not giving the sports book an interest-free loan for however many months. So that's one of the things I really like to do with that. I almost never use real money on a future bets because most of us are generating enough bonus bets throughout the course of the year that we can whet the appetite that way.
Yeah, the opportunity cost of leaving your money tied up for months at a time cannot be overstated, particularly for those shorter futures bets. In the world of college football right now, that's basically a new market for all the G5 teams to make the college football playoff. Liberty, who made the Fiesta Bowl last year, is sitting at 4-1. Now, do I want to tie my money up for 5 months for a Liberty team that may get leapfrogged even if they go undefeated? Or I could play them in the one game that I feel like they really could lose this year against App State at plus 125, plus 130. Yes, I'm missing out on that 4-1 potentially, but I keep my money in play the whole time. I can just play it on that Saturday in the fall as opposed to having to wait the 5 months. These are considerations that you need to make beyond just what do I think is going to happen and did I get the best number out of the market. If you get them at plus 450 instead of 4-1, does that move the needle for you? It all depends on your bankroll. It depends on your risk appetite and what you're trying to accomplish by the end of the season. These things all come into play. Now, as it relates to NFL football, I have a question for you, Billy. There are some bettors that just like to bet either early or late, ride the market, try to get the best of a number, try to see where the sharp money's coming in. What does line movement mean to you in a sport like that, as opposed to having your own personal power rankings or betting from your own sense of feel? There's some people that have been profitable long term just playing the market.
Yeah, it certainly goes back to the liquidity question that we talked about earlier because the NFL market is so efficient and we assume that the right number eventually turns out that if you have line movement, if you bet early at, -3 and the team moves to -5, you probably made a pretty good bet, right? Because you're 2 points ahead of what the current line is. You would expect to win that more often than not. It's obviously not guaranteed. More often than not on stuff like NFL size might mean 60% of the time. If you're hitting 60%, you're doing great. If it's on the, like I'm the big MMA guy, CLV and MMA means almost nothing because somebody will post a picture looking extra jacked on Instagram and all of a sudden the market goes, a dollar the other direction. That probably doesn't mean anything. It's also, I think the most important thing though is to realize if there's been some piece of news or some piece of information that's came out that has changed that line, or is the line just moving because sharp bettors have identified it as being off? Because that can be very different. If the line moves because a key player is ruled out or a weather situation pops up or something like that, you still get your CLV or don't have your CLV. But then betting on the other side might not be a bad idea. There's a lot of factors to consider. If it's just moving because people are betting on one side and you can find a book that hasn't moved yet, you can probably, as you alluded to, Mike, make a lot of money in the long run if you're just picking off that book or two that hasn't moved. Again, if it's because of actual information, that might be a little bit different story. But if we're getting sharp signals from one side and not the other, and you can find slow moving books, that'll help you out.
The Action Network app, for those who have not subscribed, they give you all kinds of tools and alerts when there are certain indicators moving in a certain direction. And that can be a really fun way to, have a different strategy this season as opposed to kind of shooting from the hip. If you want to deal in that data world, it is not behind a gate in terms of what we're offering. You can see exactly why certain indicators are going off and how to play that long term. Because big picture, this is like hockey, this is like soccer. There are the expected goals, and then there's the goals that actually find it to the back of the net. Long term, you want to have as many expected goals as possible because that's going to equate to you having a winning season. So closing line value, you can't go to the window and cash that ticket, but it is something that you want to strive for over time because it just gives you more opportunities to win. Speaking of opportunities to win, Evan, here's a question for you. When it comes to your favorite team, one that you may be a bit biased on, do you just completely avoid those games altogether, or do you do a bit of an emotional hedge, as we like to call it here in the biz? I'm a Jets fan, but I don't want the Jets to win because maybe they'll get a better draft pick, or maybe I bet against them this week. Playing these different head games, do you get involved with that, or you do avoid it altogether?
I'm pretty passionate about this just because I grew up a big sports fan in New York and have kind of lost fandom along the way while I'm gambling more seriously. So I would just say anybody who's a super fan who wants to put more investment than just their hopes and dreams of their actual team. They want to put their money behind it. It's just about, again, bankroll management. I have no problem putting a $5, $10, $20, depending on what your actual real unit in gambling is, on your favorite team. Or, you're going to the game, which is an example I hear all the time from people. It's fine. Bet this guy to hit a home run, bet the Nerfy, bet whatever you need to bet to have a good time. Think of it as entertainment, couch money, pizza money, as some of our people call it. But I just think, bottom line, gambling needs to be responsible and fun. So going to a game, betting on your favorite team, nothing wrong with it. Just don't go out of your means, I think, is the easiest way to explain it. Because if you're gambling and you're not having fun at all doing it, you need to not be doing it. So I just think there's a nice balance here. But I'm curious what you guys think.
What do you think, Billy?
Yeah, I mean, as a lifelong Detroit Lions fan, I did a lot of probably swung too far the other direction just because I always assumed the worst would happen for the Lions. I have hit the point now as a serious gambler where I am not making my own decisions about the Lions. They're the one team that I still feel that way about, where I'm not going to be able to think critically enough. If I see Sean Kerner saying a player prop on the Lions, I'm going to trust him. But yeah, I am not at any point betting on the Lions based on my own knowledge, just because I know I'm too biased there. So I think some introspection is probably super important there.
Yeah.
Where, am I thinking logically about this as a bettor, or is my whatever team fandom clouding that? I think that's an important part of the equation.
I always view it as there's 60 to 70 games in a given week between college and pro. There are more fish in the sea. Unless I feel super passionately about a particular angle or a news story or something that's leading me to say I have to bet on the Eagles or against the Eagles or over under, whatever it is. I would say probably max 2 or 3 times a year I'm putting any money into play that involves my favorite team. So I agree with you guys. It does come down to, how do you view it? Is this entertainment or is this business? Because if you want to be a businessman and you want to make money, you really have to divorce yourself from that emotion that can really blind people. Because a big part of even fantasy football, it's riding with your guys. It's, you have conviction, you believe in them. That may mean a bad month. And are you willing to ride out that many losing bets just to prove to yourself that you were quote unquote right? And I think that that's a big part of it that can be difficult, that people gamble for lots of different reasons, for entertainment, for a bit of a God complex to say, I knew it was going to happen and I'm proving it to you. Or there's some people that want to make money. So you can't have all three at the same time. So it's important to be able to balance that out before you get into things. I'd like to close out with this. We've talked a bit about what the sports books want you to do. They want you to throw your money on those long shots because long term, in terms of their risk, they can spread that out. They're just making money quarter to quarter. It's why these companies are so profitable. On the other side, there are opportunities that they put out there, whether they're sign-up bonuses or boosts that can help the player. Now let's get into a bit of that gray area where they're offering cash out options on things that haven't happened yet. You have, let's say the New York Giants to win the NFC East, and they get off to a 10-1 start, and they're begging you to buy out of that bet, and they're offering you money. Let's start with you, Billy. How do you approach these? I'm sure it comes down to the math of the expected value, and how often are they actually offering you something that's quote unquote fair?
Yeah, as far as I've seen, I would say probably never offering you what's fair, because if you look around in the market, you can usually find the other side of that bet where you wouldn't have to risk very much in order to guarantee a better return than the cash out is offering you. That does get tricky if it's a futures bet, a team to win the division, because then you have to think, okay, who's the next likeliest team? Do I need to bet on all three other teams? Do I need to bet on two other teams? That makes it a little bit trickier. For single games and stuff like that, though, single game, single event, you can almost always just simply bet on the other side and guarantee yourself a higher profit than the cash out would have given you. What's important, though, is making sure that you are not overbetting your bankroll, as we've talked about. If you find yourself in a spot where you don't have enough money left in your account to hedge the other side of a bet, so you feel compelled to take the cash out, you've probably been betting too much. We see this a lot where people make 10-team parlays and they've got 9 teams down, and they'll make, mid 5 figures if this last team hits. They don't have enough money to hedge on the other side. You probably win a little bit too big. It's obviously a good problem to have because you can still lock in some profit based on what you do have. But I think it ultimately does just still come down to that bankroll management, where if you're in a position where you have to take the cash out because you can't get out of it or guarantee profit any other way, you've almost always made a mistake.
It's interesting. I think there's a misconception when it comes to hedging that there's a bit of this machismo where it's like, you just don't have the intestinal fortitude to ride this out. What people need to understand is a hedge just isn't, throwing your hands up and saying, I'll take a lesser number. In some cases, it could be covering the money that you put in on the bet. So that way you either break even or you make some profit. You can move, it's a sliding scale when it comes to hedging. It's not something that's all or nothing or feeling as though you're raising the white flag to the sports book. Evan, how do you think about this in particular when it comes to not only playing something and from a futures perspective, but also how do you hedge? Is there a live market? Do you have money set aside from a bankroll management perspective to make sure that you can put the screws to the sports book and not the other way around?
To start with the cash out question, I think the question always comes down to what does the money mean to you? It all depends on the wager, right? If it's a 2-team parlay and the first team hits and there's a cash out, like there's mostly no reason to do that, and the book wants you to. If you've got a $5 parlay, like Billy talked about, there's 10 teams and 9 are down. Even if you don't have the full amount to hedge, hedging on the other side to guarantee yourself a $200, $300 profit or whatever it ends up being, I think is sometimes worth it, especially if you don't have that money in your account and you're kind of just flying by. Like if you 10 teams, last team is Sunday Night Football, so you've given yourself like your last game out. I think it's fine to do the other side of it. I think what Billy said is really important, which is the cash out is almost always going to be cut. If a team is 30-1, you're not getting 30-1 on the cash out. So they want you to click the button, but sometimes it's smart to click the button if you've got money in other places, or you can, bet the other side or bet that side again at a certain price. So to me, bankroll management, understanding the odds, and you talked about the live aspect. Live, for me at least, is a completely different bankroll, just like futures are. Futures, live, single game to me are just 3 different areas. So I have no issue mixing areas. Like if I have a bet with a cash out that's down to 1 game, game starts, I start to do some math and figure out, well, what am I waiting for? Is it a certain line? Is it a certain number? But just have a game plan. And realize that the cash out isn't always your friend, but it's not an enemy either, right? It's something there as an asset. So just make sure, you talk to a few other people and, kind of get an opinion to me that matters.
On a yearly basis, there's new states coming into the market with fully legalized online apps for sports betting. So there are always new bettors coming into the market. So we'll close out this conversation with a single piece of advice, both from you, Billy, and you, Evan. I'll get it started here. One that I can tell you from being on the other side of the transaction and seeing people dig themselves a hole. There is human nature at play when you are losing to say, I just want the better team. I will pay the premium. I don't care. I will lay the points. I will lay the money line. You get into bad habits of all of a sudden, I really need to win this one. I'm just going to go with the better team. You have to understand that's why the point spread exists. That's why the money line exists, to be able to even it out. The sports book is always venturing to try to get into that 50-50 category where they're making money and it's compelling on both sides of the market. So make sure that you understand that when you have those strong emotions, say, I just want to get back to even, I want to break out of this cold streak, betting favorites is not always the way to go, particularly in the NFL. If you want to make money, you're going to have to hold your nose from time to time and bet on these teams that your eyes are telling you are not very good. There's a reason why some of these teams cover these numbers. There's a reason why the buildings are so big in Vegas. They're built on making money in these cases, and these sports books know what they're doing. So I just want to put that out there for our audience heading into the fall. Evan, what do you think in terms of one piece of advice that you could give someone who's just looking to be a bit sharper and a bit more confident when they're placing these bets?
It's just 2 things. It's bankroll management. Whatever your bankroll is, make sure you stick to it. Don't go outside of it. Don't let anything influence it, and shop. I don't care who you are, if you're betting $5 a game or $5,000 a game. Learning how to shop early will be good habits late. So when you are betting $5 a game and hopefully you start winning and that goes to 50 and 500, you're still shopping and getting as many outs as possible. It'll never be a bad thing to be able to have as many options as possible. You don't have to place bets at a book for a day, a week, or a month, but having that option and being able to see, oh, wow, I like the Dodgers tonight and the Dodgers have the best price at this book. It's always smart.
Billy, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, this kind of goes hand in hand with Evans, but make sure you know the sign up offers, the bonuses, the rewards program, the VIP stuff, all those things that all those books you offer, which is another reason to sign up for as many you can. Because if you are line shopping and, following other people's advice, getting all the bonuses, all the promotions, all those things offered, and staying within your bankroll, you could break even not knowing anything about sports, right? Because there's enough out there. If you can really maximize those things, it goes a long, long way, especially with a smaller bankroll towards keeping your head above water. So just like I've been saying with the line shopping, if two lines are the same at two different books, but one is offering a promotion, that's something to factor in. It probably doesn't matter when you're betting 3, 4 figures as a unit because the promotion is comparatively small. But when you're just starting out, that makes a huge difference. And you can do pretty well for yourself just maximizing those as you're getting your feet wet and figuring out what's good bets and what's not.
For Billy Ward and Evan Abrams, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Thank you so much for listening. We're wishing you the best of luck headed into the fall. And a reminder, it's all about the tools in your tool set. Go ahead, download the Action Network, the award-winning app. Go ahead and subscribe. It's going to give you access to not only all of our experts, but as we mentioned, some of those alerts and tools that can help you follow line movement and steam and figure out how to get on the right side of a winning bet. All right, that's it for us. Thank you so much for listening.